In the recent sell-off of equities in South Africa, the banking sector was severely hurt by extreme negative sentiment when the sell-off of those shares pulled the valuations back to, according to our minds, very attractive levels. Of course, the immediate response of those who don't like banks as an investment would argue that banks will well be a victim of the economic fallout as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. So the question that they ask is, are the banks strong enough to survive this particular difficult era? Now, the one measure that we look at to determine whether the balance sheet is strong enough to survive a period of subdued business activity for the banks is the so-called capital adequacy ratio. Now, regulations will dictate that banks should have a capital adequacy ratio of 9%. If you look at the ratio across the big four banks, you will find that all four of those banks, their capital adequacy ratio is well above the required 9%. In fact, the strongest of them all is Standard Bank with a capital adequacy ratio of 14%. So therefore, we would argue that there's enough room for operational disappointment for the banks before their balance sheet would force them to tap capital markets for additional capital. So we do think that those balance sheets are strong enough to see them through these tough times. To our mind, the answer is simply yes. If you look at the current price earnings multiples, which is one measure that you can evaluate banks, most of these banks are trading at abnormally low multiples. In fact, Standard Bank, arguably the blue chip of the big four, is trading at a multiple of 6.5 times. Now you have to go back to 1985 after the Rubicon speech to find an era where banks traded at these very low levels. Another measure that we look at is the so-called price relative to the net asset value. Now it's very interesting that Standard Bank is now trading on par with the net asset value. And in fact, both Nedbank and Absa are trading at significant discount to the asset value being recorded in a very conservative way, I may add, in the balance sheets. So in short, yes, economic times and the business conditions will be tough for the banks. But in our mind, given the stress testing that we've done on the balance sheets, their balance sheets should be strong enough to see them through this tough time. And secondly, we think that the valuation is cheap enough to allow these assets as crucial part of client portfolios that will generate superior returns over the next 3 to 5 years for our clients.